Okay, so my friend Laura posted a video about um, all behavior being communication, and how parents are frustrated because they get that, but they want to know what their child is communicating and what to do when their child is communicating in such a way that it's behavioral and not verbal and can be quite distressing. So, I have an idea of something that can be done. It may not work with small children, it may have to be a little bit older kids, but this is something that has worked for me in the classroom as a teacher, with a little bit of a therapy background. So, I had a student a couple of years ago that I'm going to use as an example. I won't name them, and if you're one of my coworkers, know who I'm talking about, don't disclose that. So, but first, science. Uh, Autistic children and a lot of other children, okay, it's not just autistic children, but all sorts of kids with atypical neurology, have sort of hypersensitive responses to everything. And because they're wired for that hypersensitivity, the amygdala takes over often. And the amygdala is what controls that fight or flight response, that survival mode. And that is where you see the dysregulation, and you see students and children and adults who are emotionally falling apart and behaviorally a mess, and or catatonic and non-responsive. All of those are fight, flight, freeze, right? Those amygdala responses, survival. And what you want is to have a prefrontal cortex response, a logic response. But it's too late once that amygdala has done its job. The only way you're going to get past this moment to re-enter a growth mindset and be able to learn again is to stop the dysregulation. But I'm going to talk about two things that are slightly unrelated so that I can show you how they're related. I have a chicken coop, and my chicken coop is out in the woods. And when we first moved it out there, I would walk toward the chicken coop, and there was this little narrow line where the grass stopped growing because I walked it enough. And the chickens also run that line very often, and the dogs sometimes follow me out there, and other people sometimes go out to the chicken coop. But when we first started, there was just this narrow line, sort of like a deer trail, right, in the forest. When you first walk across a travel a trail, that first time, all you've done is flatten the grass. You haven't left a big mark. It would take some really good, skills to know where you've been to follow you. After you've walked it a few more times, maybe that space where you flatten the grass is a little wider and a little easier to find, and others can see where you've been. And the more often that is traveled, you form a little bit wider and more defined path to the chicken coop. Well, the brain is the same way. We create neural pathways as we do new things. So when we do something new or learn something new, we've created a new neural pathway. And at first, that is just a little flattening of the grass, and it's just a small space that's been used once. The more often we use that space, the more that grass gets flattened, the wider that path gets, and eventually the grass stops growing because you use that space so much. And it just becomes something defined and safe and returnable, and traceable. So one of the things I can do now, and I have two bad hips, and this is not just a simple trail out to my chicken coop. There's big roots in the way, and it goes uphill and then downhill, and it's at a slant. There's no flat space. I didn't build my coop in the best location for flat spaces and walking. It was just a good place that was out of sight of neighbors and not a problem for the neighborhood. So that path, I've not trailed it other than with my feet. I haven't gone in with a bulldozer and made a flat trail. I've collected a bunch of bricks so I can eventually make it a nice flat pathway, but it's going to take so much physical labor that I've just not done it. However, I walk it so often, going out to the coop several times a day for food and water and collecting eggs, that it has become something I can walk even at night in total darkness and not trip. And that's a big deal for me. Not only am I kind of naturally clumsy, but I have 2 bad hips. And that ground is sometimes moist and mushy and slippery and slidey, especially after a lot of rain. And because of its clay nature and slope. So it is something that I can travel safely because I've done it over and over and over and over, and I know every little nick and trail of that pathway. I know where the roots stick out and where the bumpy parts are and where the little dips are that I might trip upon because I've walked it so many times. It is natural, and just like I don't even have to think. I don't even have to think about where I place my feet, even though I am clumsy and have 2 bad hips. So the same with the brain. As we create new neural pathways, those first few times are going to be tough. And the more often it's traveled, the wider that trail is going to become, that stronger that definition of space is going to become. And so the faster we're going to be able to travel it safely, and also the more naturally we'll go there. So what we want to do for these children who have strong neural pathways that lead them to dysregulation because they've gone there over and over and over and over and over, and they know it works and they know it's safe. And I know it seems like dysregulation can be so sometimes violent and painful to watch and physically demanding and scary in so many ways. And all of that is true and understandable, but it is something that they have found to be safe, a safe response. That's what the amygdala's purpose is to give them a safe response. And so they travel it over and over and over and over because their brain has been trained that is a way to respond to this situation, the thing that upsets them. What we want to do is give them new neural pathways and make them so reused over and over and over that those pathways are better, stronger, and more defined than their amygdala response to go straight to dysregulation. So to do that, we need to treat it like a headache. If you are like me and you get migraines, when you get migraines, you need a rescue medication, or you need a cool, dark room that you can go chill out in. You need to get away from lights and sound and all of the things that make your migraine worse. Once you have the migraine, all you can do is treat it symptomatically. It's too late to stop the migraine. It already came. But giving in to just treating symptoms is only a Band-Aid, right? It just keeps you from, well, it's survival. It's survival. It's the medical equivalent of an amygdala response, right? So better than survival and better than using medication to treat the headache is to figure out what's causing the headaches. Have you got something going on in your brain? Have you got something going on in your diet? Have you got something going on physically that's causing these migraines? Is it external? Is it emotional? What is triggering, these migraines to start? If you can figure out what that is, you can possibly eliminate migraines from your life by avoiding the trigger. So our idea here is to create a non-trigger reality. It's not easy and it doesn't happen overnight, but I'm going to tell you the story of one student I had who was in a co-taught classroom with me, in a science classroom, and he, by I had him fourth hour. By fourth hour was done, toast. Like every little thing was setting him off. And science was his favorite subject, and he wanted to be there more than anything. But the other students in his room were driving him crazy. Other things that have already happened that day were driving him crazy. Things in his life at home were already driving him crazy. And all of it was coming together about fourth hour every day. And he would lose his mind. I mean, just could not keep regulated for his life. And he wanted so badly to be in there and didn't want to miss science. But fortunately, it was a co-taught room, so I could remove him from the room and take him for a walk in the hall or down to my empty classroom for a little while to re-regulate if needed. And during one of those re-regulation moments where he had lost it in the classroom and started yelling and hitting things, and he wasn't one to hurt other people, but he would hurt himself, and he would, violently, hit things like desks or books or slamming his pencil over and over into something. So I took him down to my room one day, and it had been a really tough time. And I said, hey, I've got this video I really want you to see. My son really liked it. I think you're going to really like it. We'd already done the walk in the hall a couple of times, and he was beginning to get regulated, but it wasn't fully there. But he was still, clenched fists and upset. So we went in my room and we turned on a video that you can search this one up if you like fun little science videos, but it's called Hexagons Are the Bestigons. And we found hexagons out of bestigons. I played it for him, and just as predicted, he adored it. He loved it. He wanted to play it over and over. We watched it several times, and then we went back to class, and he couldn't stop thinking about it. And every time I ran into him in the hallway, every time I saw him, between classes, when I would sometimes see him before school or whatever, he would want to talk about hexagons being the bestigons and how amazing hexagons are. So, I started using this in the classroom, and when I would see that he was starting to get dysregulated, starting to roll his hands and grasp his pencils and kind of, do this in the classroom, I knew, let's go stop this right now. And I'd go have a chat with him, and I'd be like, hey, tell me again, what shape did bees choose for their comb? And he'd be like, hexagons, because they're the bestigons. And then he'd be, focused on something new. And every time we did that, we were taking his amygdala response and giving it enough time that his prefrontal cortex could take over. So it only takes 10 to 15 seconds for that logic response to take over. But usually in 10 to 15 seconds, the amygdala has already done its job and you're in survival mode, and that's where dysregulation happens. But once I realized hexagons were the bestigons was the way to get him to focus on a logic response and remove his mind from the survival response, I was able to walk over to him, just say, hexagons are the, and he would finish the sentence, bestigons. And he would be able to go there with his mind over and over and over. And I must have used that 50 times that school year. And I used it when he was dysregulated in the lunchroom, and I used it when I found him dysregulated waiting on the bus. And other teachers would call me and say, hey, can he come to your classroom for a few minutes? He's losing it in here. And I'd be like, yep. He'd come over, and as he walked in the door, I'd be like, hexagons are, and he'd say, the bestigons. And then he'd take a little break in my room. But the more often we used that pathway to the hexagons or the bestigons, the faster he was able to use that logic response. And it wasn't very long before in the classroom, I could see him over at his desk, rolling his hands, holding fists, and saying, hexagons are the bestigons, hexagons are the bestigons. And it became his response to triggers in the classroom, and he was able to strengthen those neural pathways that brought him back to a way to regulate, to use that logic response instead of the amygdala response. And he was able to stop dysregulation from happening on his own. Now, this is just one thing that happened with one child one time. And do I think he's still using it? Probably not. He's probably got other skills and other things he's using now. Hopefully he's had wonderful teachers that have added on to hexagons or the vesticons with other ways to impede the amygdala and heighten the logic response. But the key here is, what can you find in your child? What can you find in your student or what can you find in yourself that you can focus on in that moment where you realize you are starting to feel that anxiety rise up, right? Or your child, you can see it's going to rise up, or you're recognizing that you're walking into a situation where this could be triggering for your student or your child. And you can start that conversation up front. Find something they love that they can focus on right now before that amygdala response. And you will create those neural pathways for them to be able to become independent in stopping that response and dysregulation. At first, when I was giving him prompts for hexagons or the vesticons, he was a dependent learner. He needed that little reminder to use the logic part of his brain to focus on something other than his current circumstances and that feeling that's rising up, that anxiety that's coming up and hurting him. But the more often I, scaffolded that and helped him remember to use it, the more those neural pathways became permanent. So they say practice makes perfect, but it doesn't. Practice makes permanence. And with neural pathways, that's what we really want. We want practice to make permanence. And as he was able to create more permanent pathways, he could walk those pathways in the dark with his eyes closed, no matter the dips, no matter the roots in his way. Just like I can walk out to that chicken coop over and over and over safely now, despite its dips and roots and my two bad hips. So I hope you can think of something. I hope you can try a few things and figure it out. And I hope you're comfortable with failure, because failure is part of the process. But as you fail, you learn what doesn't work, and that is also valuable. And eventually you're going to find something that does. Will it be the last and only thing that works? No, but it will be the first of many. And when you find that thing that works, that sort of bypasses the amygdala response and gives you that cortisol connection, that is going to be what you really need to create those permanent neural pathways. And you'll be able to give the support and scaffolding for that child or yourself as often as needed until it's so natural that they no longer need any outside influence, and they've become independent in that trait of using their logic response instead of their amygdala response. So I hope that's helpful in some way. And I love Laura. She's incredible. And if you have autistic children, she's such an amazing resource. Please keep supporting her. She's just an absolute gem and a wonder and a light in this world. So thank you so much. See you later.